Welcome, everybody, to a special Lightning Round podcast, our first off-season podcast. Today, we're covering offensive coordinators, and I think we're going to be covering 10, if I'm not mistaken. So we got a lot of guys to get through, lots of coaches that they've already interviewed, offensive coordinators that have been rumored to be connected to the Chargers, some extra ones that Jamie and I want to throw in that they hopefully interview sometime soon. But we're going to go over all that. If you guys did not hear the news, we are no longer going to be with Bolts from the Blue. The podcast is still going to be going, but we're just going to be doing it on our own. So at the end of February, so if you're watching this or listening to this, you might hear it or see it on Bolts from the Blue. But after the end of February, we will be gone. So we'll still be posting till the end of the month. But after that, we're going to be on our own. We are going to be doing Lightning Round podcasts under our own. It's going to be our own little adventure. Whether we get a network or not, doesn't matter. We'll be doing it by ourselves. The show goes on. We will not stop just because we're not on SB Nation and Vox anymore. So big shout out to everybody that helped us get to start over there. It's been a fun little 8 years, but we will be going on our own. And in terms of the podcast feed and everything, we're currently working that out. So hopefully you guys won't have to resubscribe to any new feeds or anything like that. We're working on getting it moved over to our own. So we'll let you know when we get news on that. So thanks again, everybody, for following us. And look, we're still going to be doing this thing.
Yeah, we appreciate the support. We're not going to go anywhere. Nothing really changes. We were with Bolts from the Blue for a long time. It was a great relationship for a long time. And, Vox Media and SB Nation decided to go in a different direction. They cut, I think, like 90% of their podcasts. So time to move on and on to bigger and better things. The content's still going to stay the same. We'll still be on YouTube. We'll still have the Patreon and the Discord going for those of you who are involved in that. And we're still going to do our off season, which I think is really our bread and butter. It's kind of what put us on the map. We'll be building that out here pretty soon and getting the schedule out in the next couple of weeks, I think. And we're off and running. It'll be a fun off season with or without Bolts from the Blue, even though we'll miss some of those guys.
Yeah. And to Jamie's point, it wasn't, we were told it wasn't anything from a production standpoint. Quite honestly, our podcast has doubled since this time last year. So it isn't anything like that. They just are going in a different direction over at SB Nation and Vox. They cut, the majority of their podcasts. They kept the, I think, big 3 or 4, but everybody else has gone too. We're not the only ones, but unfortunately we were part of that. And we're looking forward to starting this thing on our own and hopefully being bigger and better than ever. So nothing's going to change. We might have a little bit more freedom, but not that Bolts from the Blue ever held us back, but we're good. So thanks everybody for all the sweet comments and everything. It's been real nice. I know there were some, I don't want to say mean things, but there were some things that we're trying to take away from that, but we really do appreciate all you guys for pitching in with us. And we are going to go over this offensive coordinator list. We've got 10, and one of those 10 is not Dan Pitcher for Connor Bob. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news right up front, but we will not be doing Dan Pitcher today. If they do interview him, maybe we'll get a second podcast out here for offensive coordinator. We'll definitely talk about it when they pick whoever it is. But Dan Pitcher is not a part of that. But we'll start it off with the news that dropped like an hour before we got to get on here. The Cowboys are going their separate ways. They're parting ways with offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. Mike McCarthy is going to take over play calling. Good luck with that. But Kellen Moore is now on the market, and the Chargers are rumored to be in the market for, or at least are rumored to be in ties with having a conversation or an upcoming interview with Kellen Moore. So let's talk about him right up front.
Yeah, just throw in there real quick with McCarthy taking over play calling. That's usually the beginning of the end for a head coach. It's
Yep.
not usually a real good sign when they fire the offensive coordinator and
Yep.
the head coach takes over play calling. So
Yeah,
prediction here.
whenever a play call, head coach goes, "I'll do it myself." That's never really
That's a bad
sign of
thing.
confidence. Yeah.
Not a great vote of confidence.
No.
So I'll go ahead and make a prediction right here. I know everybody wanted Sean Payton to be the Chargers head coach this offseason. Sean Payton is going to be the Dallas Cowboys head coach next year. I almost guarantee it.
Okay.
I think he is the one that Jerry feels like got away, and Jerry is laying the groundwork, I should say, to get rid of Mike McCarthy. So I think McCarthy will be gone, and Sean Payton will be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys this time next year. That's my prediction.
Okay. I
All
like
right.
it. I like it.
So now we can go on to the Chargers.
Yes.
So as
Kellen
far
Moore.
as Kellen Moore goes, he has been kind of a hot and rising commodity as an offensive coordinator for the last couple of years. He's been at least mentioned in head coaching talks, I think, for the last 2 off seasons. I don't know that he's going to get any interviews this time around, but I know he was at least mentioned. People were suggesting him when the Chargers hired Staley. There were some suggestions from people that they hire Kellen Moore, and he's been kind of one of Jerry's babies in terms of the coaching staff for the last few years. So it's a little surprising that they let him go. But he did lead a pretty solid offense over the last few years. He was the Dallas quarterbacks coach in 2018, kind of helped Dak take his game to the next level. You started seeing the passing yards and the touchdowns increase, the efficiency increase, and the turnovers decrease. Once Moore became the Dallas quarterbacks coach in 2018, he became the offensive coordinator in 2019 and kept that role through this year. And Dallas had a top 10 offense in terms of yards per play, scoring, third down conversions, and red zone touchdown rate. Every year he was the OC except for 2020, which was the year that Dak got hurt and only played 5 games. Their offense was abysmal in 2020. I think they were like 24th or 25th in terms of pass and run DVOA that year. So they were pretty bad, but that's going to happen when you lose your starting quarterback. So something you can kind of write off as a a product of the circumstances, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at total DVOA for this offense over the last few years, since Kellen Moore took over, they were number 2 in total offensive DVOA in 2019. Again, they fell to 24th in 2020. They were 6th in 2021 and 15th in 2022. They've been kind of all over the board. What they do is they run a balanced offense. They really specialize in 11 personnel. So 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 running back. They try to stay balanced this year more than ever. They were really balanced in the run game. They were 10th in rush DVOA, and they did that by having 2 backs, Ezekiel Elliott and
Tony
Pollard.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Pollard, each run for over 850 yards, and they combined for 21 touchdowns between the 2 of them. And they don't just run the ball with the running backs; they throw the ball to the running backs quite a bit. And I believe they had three receivers, 3 targets catch the ball for at least 500 yards, and they had like 5 or 6 catch at least 3 touchdowns. So they spread the ball around. They like to attack the middle of the field quite a bit. Not uncommon at all to see CeeDee Lamb making big plays in that offense on the deep over, post routes, things like that in the middle of the field. You see the possession receiver, Michael Gallup, making plays on the boundaries more often than not, on the deep outs and the hitches and the comebacks, things like that, the dig routes, slants. So they're a pretty balanced modern offense. I don't think Moore has had quite as much success as the media likes to say he's had. They've been pretty up and down in terms of total DVOA. Again, like I said, very successful in terms of yards per play, third down conversions, scoring, and red zone efficiency, touchdown scoring efficiency. But overall, the offense has not been as productive or efficient as I think people would like to say it's been with Dak as the quarterback and with Moore calling the plays.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he is one of the more decorated offensive coordinators we're probably going to talk about here. He finished regular season 4th in scoring, 11th in total yards per game. Of course, this season Dak Prescott regressed, who led the NFL in interceptions, posted his worst quarterback rating since 2017. In 2021, he of course led the Dallas offense and the NFL in scoring, set a franchise record for most points in a season. So there are a lot of ups, there are a lot of downs, but I felt like just going back and being able to kind of watch some of these games in the last hour, a lot of the regression in my mind this year came in the play calling. It felt like a lot of predictability. I felt that even though they had two talented backs, they leaned on the running game a lot. A part of that is, having Pollard and Ezekiel is good. I think McCarthy and Jerry Jones probably push them on him a little bit. Jerry Jones loves Zeke. So maybe you can make an excuse that way, but it just felt like, just in terms of the running scheme that he runs, it just felt rudimentary. It felt predictable. And quite honestly, it felt like during the season, better defenses figured more out. He was absolutely coaching a box against the 49ers in the playoffs. A lot of other teams that ran zone really had success against Moore in his play calling. It felt like it was kind of his kryptonite as an OC this year. And, the resume really is impressive. He's had success as an NFL offensive coordinator. He's had the number one offense as the youngest OC in the league. He's still a young and up and coming offensive coordinator. He climbed the ranks really fast in Dallas. I think he deserves another spot. I feel like good defenses figured more out. I think he feels like a guy that's good enough to keep a good offense good, but I don't think he really elevates a team to that next tier or two. I think, quite honestly, it feels like he'd be in the same type of scenario with Dallas. He'd be around for 2-3 years, and then you'd have to go about replacing him all over again and start all over. I'm not totally sold on Moore. I'm kind of lukewarm on him. I know that a lot of people, it feels like he's being a little overrated just because of how young he is, but also you can't not talk about the success he's had in the NFL. So he's definitely not the worst coordinator in this list, but a guy that I've got a couple guys ahead of him that we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is I think there is an element to Moore that's a lot like what we've talked about with Eric Bieniemy in the past, which is to say it's hard to separate Moore from Mike McCarthy, because a lot of the things that you just mentioned, in particular the simple nature of the running game and the predictability of the offense, those are criticisms that Mike McCarthy faced when he was fired from Green Bay several years ago.
Yeah.
So, and it's McCarthy's offense that Moore runs. It's not Moore's scheme. He didn't create anything. Yes, he's calling the plays, but McCarthy is an offensive head coach. You have to figure he's got a lot of say in the game plan and how the game is being called. And they're probably running the same things over and over again that they feel like work really well for Dak, particularly late in the year when he was turning the ball over a lot. They probably tried to simplify some things for him. So it's really hard to separate how good Kellen Moore is from how mid Mike McCarthy is, and get an honest evaluation of Moore in that respect. He had some success. Like I said, they had a lot of success in terms of yards per play and scoring, third down, red zone. All that is really good. They had some really nice years in terms of offensive total DVOA. They were generally much better in terms of passing DVOA than they were in terms of rushing DVOA, but they did have some solid years in that regard too. I think he's a guy, he's going to get another chance somewhere. I think, and he should. And I think it's definitely a positive that the Chargers are interested in speaking to him, because I think in the search like this, where you're trying to find somebody who's hopefully going to be here for a while, I think you need to gather as much information as you can. And this is something that we talked about when they hired Staley 2 years ago, and people were freaking out when they interviewed Jason Garrett. Same kind of, and I'm not putting Moore in the same league as Jason Garrett in terms of no, don't touch that guy with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
But I think
he's coming up later.
Hey, that's coming up. Yeah, for sure. No doubt, no doubt. Um, but I think it's important to gather as much information as you can, get as many new ideas as you can, talk to guys who have had success before you settle on whatever it is you settle on. And I think, there's been a push on Twitter lately to hire a quote unquote experienced coordinator. Well, what was Joe Lombardi if not experienced?
Mhm.
And I think it's really important as we go through these lists and these candidates to remember that and we've all seen it in our professions, in any profession, it doesn't matter what you do, whether it's football, whether it's banking, whether it's radio, whatever it might be, experience a lot of times is just an excuse to have bad habits.
Mm.
You just keep making the same mistakes over and over again because you're stuck in your ways and you form bad habits that you can't break. It's an excuse not to learn from your mistakes. So experience isn't always all it's cracked up to be. I think it could be potentially a good thing here with Kellen Moore, but as a broad idea, it's not always the best thing. Sometimes you need to get some fresh ideas in there and try some new things, because obviously the experience with Lombardi did not work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily the end all be all in the search.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on. Let's go down this list because we've got a lot of them. And here's a guy that doesn't have any OC experience. This is the Ram, and we're going to go through first the list of guys that the Chargers have already interviewed. So moving down this list, it's Rams passing game coordinator and QB's coach Zach Robinson.
So Robinson is the first of a number of guys who have very limited experience in terms of coaching in the NFL. And again, I just went on my tirade about experience. So it's not necessarily a death knell for a guy who doesn't have experience as a play caller. But a lot of these guys are thin on experience in terms of NFL coaching, period. Although Robinson is a guy who I think is pretty interesting for a number of reasons. So just to give you guys some background on Robinson, he played 4 years for Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. Gundy's considered one of the foremost offensive minds in college football, and his system has changed pretty much every year depending on who his quarterback is. And they ran very much like a read option, run happy, kind of not light on the passing, but they were kind of a gimmicky offense when Robinson was there. Wound up making his way to the NFL. He backed up Tom Brady after being drafted in, I think, the 7th round by the Patriots. He's been around a lot of really, really smart coaches. He's learned from Bill O'Brien, who, despite the fact that he's, completely useless as an NFL executive, is widely considered a pretty intelligent offensive mind. He's learned from O'Brien. He studied with Tom Brady, obviously Bill Belichick, Ernie Zampese, Hugh Jackson, Sean McVay. All those are guys that he's learned from in the NFL. When he tore his at the labrum, I think either his labrum or I think he might have had Tommy John surgery that ended his NFL career. He went straight into developing high school and college quarterbacks for the next level at the Dallas the QB Ranch in Dallas, which is basically one of the elite developmental systems for quarterbacks in the country. He was the lead trainer. He also developed their curriculum. And I think he was there for 2 or 3 years before moving on to Pro Football Focus, where he was their primary evaluator of quarterbacks. And one of the things that I like about Robinson's trajectory is he's been immersed in football basically since he was in high school, in terms of studying film, learning different offenses, studying what works, studying what doesn't. He's always studying film and he's always evaluating, and he's had some success elevating guys who are getting ready to make that next step to the NFL. And then after spending a couple of years at PFF, in 2019, he became the assistant quarterbacks coach for the Rams. 2020, he was the assistant wide receiver coach. He became the assistant quarterback coach again in 2021, and then was elevated to pass game coordinator and quarterback coach in 2022. So this is a guy who has a lot of experience working with NFL level quarterbacks. He's played in the NFL. He set tons of records at Oklahoma State, so he has a lot of success playing at the collegiate level. He's learned under one of, if not the greatest offensive mind in the modern NFL, in Sean McVay. And you can see where there have been some opportunities for him to elevate quarterbacks at the NFL level. Stafford was a guy who was struggling and seemed like he was on the decline when they got him, and he helped coach up Stafford to a Super Bowl ring. So he's a guy who has had some success working with quarterbacks at all three levels. And I think there's some interesting aspects of his background that could make it make sense to hire him as an offensive coordinator if he's surrounded by the right people, where I wouldn't be terribly concerned about the lack of play calling experience. I just think it's probably a pretty safe bet that he's absorbed a lot of information from Sean McVay, and having him calling plays and working with Herbert, who has, I think, a lot of the same skill sets that obviously Herbert's more physically gifted than Robinson was, but in terms of being able to scramble, make plays with his arms, extend plays, things like that, there are some similarities there that Robinson might be able to help Herbert kind of elevate the athletic part of his game and make more plays with his legs, and maybe help him change how he goes about making his reads. Because I think one of the big problems that he's having right now is how Lombardi and Staley have coached him to go through his progressions, and they've coached him in a very conservative way. And hopefully Robinson can help kind of start to reverse that a little bit.
Yeah. So just going off of what Jamie said, he gave you a pretty extensive backstory there, but also just something to keep in mind as we go through, because I think this is going to be a common theme that's going to thread throughout all these coordinators, is during his offseason press conference, Staley said that he wants something like Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan's system in terms of an offensive coordinator and how they run their offense. So we're going to see a lot of ties here with McVay and Shanahan. But in terms of Zach Robinson, he spent 4 years with the Rams. He also spent time with Staley, obviously, when he was the DC there with the Rams. We saw he was the assistant quarterback coach, assistant wide receiver coach, assistant quarterback coach. Then he was promoted to pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach in 2022. So like Jamie mentioned, a lot of work with quarterbacks. We know he played college quarterback. He was kind of a practice squad and backup quarterback in the NFL. So he's got the NFL experience. He knows how to develop quarterbacks. He did it at the high school level, getting them ready for college. So he's got that perspective. Even if he didn't get any NFL starts, that's a huge thing for him, not only just from developing real talent on the field, but then also taking the analytical side at PFF and using that. And then now, it just feels like Staley wanted to hire Kevin O'Connell back when he was with the Rams. The Rams blocked that. He ended up going to Minnesota. But Zach Robinson, in the terms of trajectory and the kind of the play calling and the personality type that Staley likes, this feels a lot like O'Connell. He's pretty green in terms of his coaching experience, but it feels like, in everything that I've read, that he's going to be an offensive coordinator before not too long. He's just a guy that's really, really ascending. So he's got experience in the McVay system, which is important for Staley, which he wants to move towards. And he's obviously a smart guy who can help Herbert in his development. So really, this makes a ton of sense in terms of interview. So we're gonna give our kind of top 5, maybe even top 10 at the end of the show. We'll talk about where each of these guys rank, but this one makes a ton of sense. He's got ties to McVay and a guy who maybe, if you're looking at it, you want to get ahead of the curve. If he's going to be an offensive coordinator soon, maybe you want to get on that train a little early. A lot of people felt the same way about Staley when he was hired as a head coach. He only had 1 year as a defensive coordinator, but they wanted to jump on him early. He was young, smart, up and coming. This might be that move here with Zach Robinson. So let's move on to this next name. And
do we have to?
We haven't talked about this directly, but when Jamie said, don't touch him with a 10-foot pole, this is the guy you don't touch with a 10-foot pole. And that is Greg Olsen. He is the Rams senior offensive assistant. So Olsen has the most experience, I think, of all the potential coordinators they've interviewed so far, and maybe of this entire list. He's been an offensive coordinator 6 times in the NFL with the Lions, the Buccaneers, the Raiders, the Jaguars, the Raiders again. His longest stint as offensive coordinator was in 2018 when he was the Raiders offensive coordinator for 4 years. This by far is the worst option for the Chargers, in my opinion. And of course, most recently, like I mentioned earlier, he was the offensive assistant under head coach Sean McVay. So there are those McVay ties, but he is absolutely stale as a signal caller. He has been passed over by 6 organizations in 20 years, including being with the Rams 3 times, the Raiders twice. The sign of a good play caller is his opportunities and his development. Olsen's development, in my mind, has been really middling. I mean, when you look through the rosters that he's had, it doesn't feel like he's really elevated anybody to a point where he should be getting this many opportunities as an offensive coordinator. And in 20 years, he's never got promoted as a head coach at any level in 20 years in the NFL. He basically, what feels like, is just banking on that experienced signal caller tag and just kind of riding that towards the end of his career here. The experience is really, in my mind, is all that Olsen has for him. Interviewing him is fine if you're doing like they did with Jason Garrett and maybe even with Kellen Moore, where you're picking his brain a little bit. But hiring Greg Olsen is worst case scenario for me of these names mentioned, and would be just a god awful mistake and a guy you're absolutely going to be replacing in about 2 years.
So I think Garrett gave a pretty good synopsis. So if you are interviewing Greg Olsen only with the idea of hiring him as an offensive coordinator, and he somehow comes out of this group at the head of the pack, you have failed miserably in your search.
Yep.
You have failed Justin Herbert. You have failed all of your offensive weapons.
Something and you failed Garrett and Jamie, which is most important.
Yes, which is even worse. Yes, absolutely. However, I will say this.
Okay.
Olsen is very highly regarded as a quarterback's coach. And if you go through his history, he is the guy who is credited with developing Drew Brees at Purdue. He had success, not continuous success, but spots of success with guys like Josh Freeman, Mark Bulger, Jared Goff, Blake Bortles, and Derek Carr, where he came in and he elevated guys' play at the quarterback position.
Hall of Fame cast of characters.
Well, they're middle of the road guys, but almost all those guys had career years, at least one career year under his tutelage as the quarterback's coach.
I'm just kidding around, but okay.
I know.
Yes,
I know. Yeah. I would not touch this guy with a 10-foot pole as the offensive coordinator. I mentioned earlier, if you want to hire a guy like Robinson, you could see a scenario where maybe they hire an experienced quarterbacks coach to back him up. And that's a situation where Greg Olsen might make some sense because he is widely regarded as a very good positional coach. He's just dog shit as a play caller. So I don't think you want him anywhere near the play sheet. But if you look at Derek Carr is the best example of him elevating somebody over an extended period of time. Carr was really struggling when he came to the Raiders in 2018. And I believe Carr's passer rating and QBR all increased the first 3 years that Olsen was there, 2018 through 2020. He had a lot of success elevating Carr's game. Those 3 years are the years that really elevated Carr into the national conversation as a top 10 quarterback, which is ridiculous. But that was the conversation we were having this time last year, or the media was having this time last year after Carr beat Herbert in week 17. So I don't want to hire Olsen. I wouldn't want him anywhere near the play sheet. However, if you're concerned about a lack of experience and you want a good quarterback coach in the room, there could be an argument made for hiring him as a quarterback coach. And I actually think there are some scenarios where they could theoretically hire 2 or 3 people from this list, hiring one as the offensive coordinator, probably one as a running game coordinator, and one as a quarterback coach. So I wouldn't be surprised if more than one guy gets hired from this list.
I could see that. I could definitely see that. In a hypothetical world where all things are equal, that makes a ton of sense. In the Dean Spanos world of Chargers, it's Greg Olsen, QB coach, and then whoever as OC, and then Olsen just kind of waiting in the wings until the new OC screws up so they can just promote him within.
And that's the concern.
Yeah.
Is if they hire Olsen as the quarterback's coach, at some point he's going to be calling plays. However, I mean, the flip side of that argument is, let's say they hire Robinson, right? Let's say they hire Robinson as the offensive coordinator or any of these inexperienced guys, and they back him up with Olsen as the quarterback's coach. If the offensive coordinator doesn't work out, they're probably blowing out the whole staff because they've had another disappointing year and things have gone wrong, in which case Olsen's not going to get that shot to call plays.
Right. That's the other
unless
side
it's on some kind of an interim basis, which I doubt would happen anyway.
No.
So, because they don't generally fire coaches in the middle of the year. So I think if you see a scenario where you're hiring an inexperienced offensive coordinator and you're hiring Olsen as the quarterback's coach, I think there is some merit to that argument. I think the likelihood of Olsen taking over as the play caller at any point in that first year is pretty slim. And if things don't work out in that first year, Staley's gone and everybody else is gone with him. So it's probably unlikely that Olsen calls plays, in which case maybe you roll the dice, because I think Olsen probably is a pretty good quarterback's coach. He just shouldn't be calling plays. No,
he should not be the offensive coordinator. But to your point, and somebody who mentioned it in the chat here, and I was going to mention here in a little bit too, our next guy on the list, maybe one of those guys that could be brought on as a QB coach. Let's talk about Vikings assistant QB coach, Jared Johnson.
There isn't a whole lot to talk about with Johnson.
I know,
unfortunately. Yeah. He's a 2-time member of the Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship program, once with the Niners, once with the Colts. He spent 2 years as a Colts offensive quality control coach under Frank Reich. He was a high school coach from 2015 to 2018, and he spent last year as the Vikings assistant quarterbacks coach. He also played at Texas A&M, graduated as a school leader in pass attempts, completions, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. I mean, there's nothing here with Johnson to really cling to as an offensive coordinator. Has he really had that much of an impact as an assistant quarterbacks coach on Kirk Cousins, who I think is a pretty mid-level quarterback, has been his whole life and probably is going to continue to be for a long time. There were a lot of smoke and mirrors with that Vikings team this year. Cousins probably part of that to a large degree. I don't really see anything here unless he just blows them away in an interview that makes me think he's going to get hired as the OC. But maybe he's one of those guys that they bring in as a passing game coordinator or a quarterbacks coach or something along those lines to help elevate him without throwing him to the fire.
Yeah, that's part of my thinking here. I think so. I mean, you mentioned his resume, which is really short, and we don't know in terms of development as an assistant quarterbacks coach the real effect he's had on Kirk Cousins, who, quite honestly, in those 2 years hasn't been a world beater. While the Vikings did pretty good in terms of record, they didn't do very good in terms of the whole season. But two things I got from this. One, Johnson has ties to Kevin O'Connell, who, again, the Chargers wanted to hire as offensive coordinator before Lombardi. So maybe there's something there that it maybe pick his brain a little bit on Kevin O'Connell and his success this year. Maybe there's that. Also, my thinking is he's an assistant quarterbacks coach. Jumping from assistant quarterbacks coach with little experience being green and then jumping all the way to offensive coordinator is a pretty big leap. In my mind, it makes sense to talk to him, see if there's anything there that Kevin O'Connell maybe rubbed off on him. There's something extra there that you can get from him. And then maybe it's a guy you bring in as your quarterbacks coach, give him a bump, but not just jump to offensive coordinator. Maybe this is a guy you keep on if he's impressive in the interview, and you bring him in as a quarterbacks coach to replace Shane Day. So
yeah,
that was my initial thinking.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, yeah, it's hard to see him beating out a lot of these guys for the offensive coordinator role just because his resume isn't even one full page. So yeah. I don't know what he could talk about in an interview, to be honest with you. Maybe some of O'Connell rubbed off on him. Maybe he's a guy who's ripe for promotion, like one level promotion, not skipping straight to OC. But this is, like I said earlier, this is a process where you want to gather as much information as you can. You want to talk to as many people as you can. The Chargers always in the past have always fallen in love with somebody early in the process, hired them out of panic, and it's almost always been a mistake.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to be in too much of a rush right now, which I like. And they're interviewing a ton of people, which I also like. So I think they're going about this search in a very intelligent way, which kind of suggests to me, even though I know there are people in the chat who feel like Staley's an idiot, it feels like he's directing this process.
Yeah.
Because this is very out of character for how the Chargers normally go about hiring coaches, whether it be a head coach or an assistant coach. They usually hire somebody immediately. It's usually somebody they have some familiarity or experience with, and they fall in love with somebody and they hire them out of panic, and that doesn't seem to be happening here.
And this is another point that is a good one from the chat. Wes Phillips, the Vikings offensive coordinator, they wanted to have an interview with him for a lateral move. He rejected the interview, so they obviously wanted somebody maybe from that Viking staff to talk about maybe a little Kevin O'Connell there. And they brought in Jared Johnson. I mean, and quite honestly, you wouldn't see a name like Jared Johnson in a interview for a OC job, 5-6 years ago, pre-Staley. You wouldn't see somebody this inexperienced being even considered as an offensive coordinator. So it's interesting that they're running kind of the gamut from the Greg Olsen to the Jared Johnsons and just getting everything they can glean from this process. And it feels all Staley to me too. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Absolutely. And just to add, I know we already talked about Olsen, but I think part of what's going on here, because Olsen isn't really he's not a Shanahan guy. He's not a McVay guy. I mean, he spent 1 year coaching with McVay, but he's not really a McVay guy. He's a guy who's going to do things his way. And for that reason, he kind of stood out on the list to me as like, why even bother? Unless they're setting the floor and just picking his brain.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the next one, which is the Rams assistant head coach / tight ends coach, Thomas Brown. Now, Brown played in the NFL for 3 years. Then he was a running backs coach at Chattanooga, Marshall, South Carolina, Wisconsin, Georgia. As a running backs coach, Melvin Gordon had a career year there under Brown. And then the following season, he went to Georgia where Nick Chubb had his best college production. So then he moved up to offensive coordinator and running backs coach at Miami for 3 seasons. As the OC, he got a bunch of kids drafted from Miami, just going through that list. It was tight ends David Njoku, Chris Herndon, running backs DJ Dallas, Travis Homer, wide receiver Braxton Berrios, Brad Kaya. He got Brad Kaya drafted, which is a minor miracle. But as the offensive coordinator, Miami had a winning record all 3 seasons when Thomas Brown was offensive coordinator. They went 9-4, 10-3, and 7-6. He then moved to the NFL in 2020 with the Rams, where he was the running backs coach, then the tight end coach, and assistant head coach this past season. He's had success as a college offensive coordinator, has experience in that McVay system, which we know is important, has shown he can develop running backs and tight ends at the college level. But still, that bodes well for guys like Austin Eckler and Gerald Everett or whoever they draft in the draft at tight end. And even though he doesn't have NFL offensive coordinator experience, players rave about him. I was reading an interview where there were Rams players saying that he simplified the game for them. Tight end did, and one of the running backs, and they didn't name the running back or tight end in this article, but they called him a no BS coach. So a guy who gets his message across and simplifies the game. It bodes well for a guy who's looking to be an offensive coordinator. So in terms of development, you love to see it from a guy like Thomas Brown, and a guy who I'm sure will probably get some offensive coordinator position soon, and a guy that has an impressive resume.
Yeah, he's got one of the more impressive resumes of the, quote unquote inexperienced guys on this list. He does have play calling experience. He has been very heavily involved in some successful running games, like you mentioned. He coached Melvin Gordon at Wisconsin. He coached Nick Chubb at Georgia. You mentioned some of the backs that he coached at Miami. Obviously, he's had some success with Akers and Darrell Henderson and other guys with the Rams. I read the same article you did, talking about how he's a no BS coach. He's very smart. He's a good. They said he's a good dude, and he makes things simple for them. And I think one of the problems with the Chargers running game, in addition to not having an identity, has been that don't teach it very well. And I feel like it's not a very simple running game, the way they go about things. And just reading his resume and all the success he's had, I know he's had play calling experience. I'm not as in love with him as some of the guys in our Discord are as the offensive coordinator. This guy screams running game coordinator to me. Just reading his resume, he's a guy who I could see getting hired, even if he doesn't wind up getting the OC position, just because he has had so much success working with tight ends. He helped elevate Tyler Higbee's game this year for the Rams. I feel like he could come in and simplify the running game, give them an identity, and really help them succeed in being not just balanced, but being explosive in the running game on a consistent basis. So he's a guy I would keep an eye out for. I think he's probably going to interview pretty well just based on what I read about him. And he's a guy who I would like to see hired, whether it's as OC or as a running game coordinator. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. You'd love to have a guy like this on your staff.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to Titans tight end coach Luke Steckel, excuse me.
So Steckel is another guy that I enjoyed reading about him, and he's somebody who I knew nothing about going into this project, and he shot up my list way more than I thought he would reading about him. So Steckel is a guy. He spent 4 years as an assistant to the head coach with the Browns from 2009 to 2012. He's been with the Titans ever since. This is an extreme rarity in the NFL. He has survived parts of 4 different head coaching tenures with the Titans. Munchak, Malarkey, Wiz, and now he's with Vrabel. And he seems like he's on the rise. Even as guys are coming in and out, he continues to advance his career with the Titans. So he started with the Titans in 2013 as an assistant to the head coach, became an offensive assistant in 2014 and filled that role from 2014 to 2016. Wide receiver coach in 2017, offensive assistant again, 2018 to 2020. This is a guy who is credited with really working with Ryan Tannehill and his comeback player of the year season in 2019. That was a year when the offense was 4th in yards per play and 1st in red zone efficiency, and Tannehill led the NFL in passer rating and average yards per pass attempt. He is widely credited with developing A.J. Brown and Corey Davis and leading them to their best seasons at wide receiver. He coached the tight ends from 2021 to 2022. And both of Ryan Tannehill's most productive and most efficient seasons came with Steckel assisting him. So this is a guy who has a lot of experience working with pretty much every skill position on the offense, with the exception of running back. He's developed a new group of tight ends over the last couple of years. They've had a lot of turnover at tight end and wide receiver over the last 4 or 5 years, and they continue to be competitive and have a shot at the playoffs pretty much every year. They just continue to reinvent the offense and put guys in position to succeed and develop guys on the fly. So Steckel is a guy that he's high on my list. We'll do our rankings here in a little bit. He's really high on my list for OC. And much like Thomas Brown, he would be one of the first 2 guys on my list for running game coordinator, which is something I think the Chargers need. He is another guy who I could see getting hired, whether it's as OC or at another position, just because he's so well-rounded in terms of his experience with offensive skill position players. He was part of the offense when Mike LaFleur was designing that running game for Derrick Henry a few years ago before he moved on to Green Bay. They run the ball in a very creative fashion. Their tight ends all block. They all catch the ball well. They're all heavily involved in both the passing game and the running game. I just feel like this is a guy who is on the rise and is probably going to be a head coach before too long. And I think he's a guy who you want to sink your teeth into before somebody else does. And for that reason, I think he's probably pretty high on the Chargers list. But there's a lot to like here. No play calling experience, which I'm not too hung up on because I like the fact that he's coached every position group, with every skill position group in the offense, with the exception of running back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add on to some of that, so he's the son of former Vikings coach Les Steckel, and he's a Princeton grad, which everybody wants to mention when they're talking about Luke Steckel. And so he's got that family lineage, which I know some people think that runs strong in family coaching success. But in terms of his coaching, I mean, you mentioned a lot of it, but in terms of the last 2 years, just the recent stuff in 2021, while he was the tight ends coach, Anthony Ferkser and Luke Stalker got hurt. So he had Jeff Swaim, McCole Pruitt, and Tommy Hudson on the roster, which was kind of a down year for that group. But this past year, he did an excellent job developing Chig Okonkwo, who really looked like a top 10 tight end towards the end of this year. He was second on the team in receiving last season. They added Austin Hooper, who was fourth on the team in receiving yards. I mean, those tight ends were huge for the Titans at the end of that, or at the beginning of that winning streak in 2022 when they were hot to start off. So he did an excellent job there. I saw twice they mentioned that that Steckel could be the next Kevin O'Connell / Ben Johnson, as those guys that are just in that meteoric rise. That's going to be a OC not before long and a head coach pretty soon too. So he's kind of one of those rising offensive minds in the NFL. So this is definitely a guy you want on your coaching staff. He showed he can develop guys at a ton of different position groups on the offense. Granted, it's a small sample size on some of it because he's the assistant. He was the offense, and it was kind of interesting being the assistant to the head coach. It felt very Dwight Schrute in the Office-ish, because it's usually just assistant head coach. But, he's been assistants throughout his career, but then he was the tight end coach most recently, and the development is good to see, and obviously a guy that seems to just be ascending. And whether it's as offensive coordinator or something else, this is definitely a guy you'd love to have on your staff.
Yeah, and I think something else to mention about this, about the Titans and Steckel as well, is everybody loves the way that the Titans run the ball. And they're a very physical, in-your-face, downhill rushing attack. I don't think they're overly complicated. They are creative in the way they run the ball and creative in the way they use their tight ends and blocking schemes. But everybody knows they're going to run the ball, and they still can't stop it. They just run the ball down your throat over and over and over again. And that's something the Chargers desperately need. I think the other side of that too is they're also very creative in how they get the ball to their tight ends in the passing game. A lot of tight end screens, a lot of bubble screens. They get the ball to them in the middle of the field, down the field. I mean, Steckel played a role in developing Jonnu Smith, who got a huge payday as top tight end on the free agent market and has basically disappeared in New England without Steckel. You mentioned Hooper, Chig Okonkwo. They just churn out tight ends who make plays for them in the passing game, and they do it in a variety of ways, and they seem to really feature the tight ends. They had Delaney Walker there while Steckel was there. So just a long lineage of very productive receiving tight ends, guys who can block, guys who can catch. And he's played a role in developing all those guys. So I think there's something to be said there as well. And that's something the Chargers need. They don't do a really good job of getting their tight ends to football. They really haven't since Hunter Henry left. And in a lot of ways, they even struggled to get him the ball at times too. So I think Steckel is a very promising guy, like you mentioned, on the rise, and definitely somebody that I would not – he's on my top 5. I would not object to them hiring him if he's the guy.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's it for the list. Even though we mentioned Kellen Moore up top, he wasn't part of the interviews yet. But another guy that's been linked to the Chargers, hasn't had an interview yet, is the next guy on our list, and it is the Bills QB coach, Joe Brady. Just to give you a little history, started as a linebackers coach of William & Mary, was an offensive assistant with the Saints with their high-flying offense in 17 and 18. When then he got his job at LSU as offensive coordinator, wide receiver coach. He got to coach both Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, won a national championship. Brady was hired as the Carolina Panthers offensive coordinator in 2020 under Matt Rule. Both seasons, he did not have Christian McCaffrey, who got injured both those years. In 2020, Brady had 4 different Carolina players eclipse 1,000 yards scrimmage yards with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. That season was actually Teddy Bridgewater's best season as a pro, and he's still, quite honestly, getting jobs because of that season under Brady to this day. Everybody's trying to unlock that Carolina Panther Teddy Bridgewater days. But in the offseason, Joe Brady got a few head coaching interviews, but then returned to Carolina as the OC again the next season. 2021, he gets Sam Darnold at QB who got cut after he had like a hot start out of the gate. Or he didn't get cut, but he got out to a hot start and then kind of faltered. It eventually fell apart. He got hurt. Some of the reasons Brady was fired is because Rule said he quote unquote wanted to run the ball more. And in fact, there was an article from week 6 of that season that Rule had a plan to run the ball 33 times the next week. No matter how the game was going, in-game adjustments be damned. We're running the ball 33 times, period, end of sentence. They missed that mark. And then Rule made a point to Brady to run the ball more each and every week throughout that season. He was eventually fired by Carolina. This season he became the Bills QB coach. There's proof in my mind that with a good quarterback like Joe Burrow, he can be one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. Granted, it was for college level. But what appeals to me is what he did in Carolina. There's some really good things. The way he used Curtis Samuel as a gadget receiver to get him more touches. The way they were able to stretch the field with guys like DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Plus, Bridgewater had the most rushing yards in his career under Brady. So he did, even though he got fired, I thought he did some pretty good things in Carolina. In fact, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Teddy Bridgewater had their career bests under Brady as offensive coordinators. So while the Panthers record didn't really show it, Brady took an offense that was ranked 27th overall in DVOA and pushed to 17th in his first year as offensive coordinator. So I know there's some issues with Brady. He is not perfect. I think he does deserve another shot at offensive coordinator, whether that's with the Chargers or somebody else. But when you really look at that tenure with Matt Rule, nothing really worked out under his watch. He had bad QB play in Carolina. His star running back was hurt the entire time. Quite honestly, I like Joe Brady. I liked him a lot more when I really dug into his background. I know there was some bad stuff, and that tenure in Carolina kind of left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, me included. When I went back and looked at everything, when you looked at it in retrospect and how bad Matt Rule was there in Carolina, I think he definitely deserves another chance. So Joe Brady, to me, is in my top 5. He's exciting. We'll get to those top 5 in a little bit, but I know there's a lot of bad things being said about him, but I just wanted to give some of the good stuff because there was some really good stuff when I dug deep.
So Brady was a guy who was probably in my top 2 or 3 when we started this process. And as I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, there are still things that I like about him, but there are some things that give me pause. First, let's talk a little bit about his scheme.
Okay.
So Brady runs a 3-by-1 spread offense. So they're running 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, 1 running back, 1 tight end. More often than not, you get 3 wide receivers to the field side. You've got a wide receiver or a tight end and a running back on the boundary side. He does a good job of stressing both man and zone concepts with his 3-by-1 spread offense. You see a lot of high-low concepts in the middle of the field, something the Chargers were often lacking. You see a lot of slants. He'll motion guys occasionally into their routes to give them a head start. He does ask the running backs to run routes. So, in the past, we've seen a lot of Austin Eckler running option routes, running wheel routes, getting the ball down the field in space. We didn't see as much of that the last 2 years. The last 2 years, he was really more of a dump off and a screen guy. I think they can unlock more of Eckler as a receiving back with an offense like the one that Brady runs. I think you'll also see some bunch sets in that 3-by-1. They'll use that to set up the slot fade and create some spacing. His focus is on speed. He likes to put. He had a ton of speed in Carolina. He had a ton of speed in LSU. He likes to spread the defense out, make them basically defend every blade of grass, horizontally and vertically. He likes to get his playmakers the ball in space, which is a positive, and give them an opportunity to create yards after catch. All positives. I think some of the downsides are he doesn't mix things up a whole lot. He'll stick with the same concepts over and over and over again, which can be good. But you don't see a lot of rub routes. You don't see a lot of picks. There isn't a whole lot of motion other than just trying to figure out what the coverage is. he doesn't really commit to the run. He didn't run the ball a whole lot at LSU. Didn't run the ball a whole lot at Carolina, and isn't very effective. He kind of bails on it when it's not working. And there's a lot of complaints from players that he doesn't. He's a poor play caller. He doesn't make adjustments. He has what he wants to do. He's going to do what he wants to do, and he's not going to change a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of flexibility there. Not a whole lot of disguises from the scheme. And I think the formations can get kind of stagnant and predictable at times. I have some concerns about whether or not the Chargers have the speed to be able to succeed in his system. You talk about Robbie Anderson, you talk about Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore. All those guys can flat out run. The Chargers don't have anybody who can run like them. They also don't really have anybody who are as elusive as those guys are in space and are as good with the ball in their hands after the catch. So I have some concerns about Brady. I wouldn't object to the hire. I think they could probably build an offense that works for their scheme if he's willing to adjust. I have some concerns. I mean, his boss, his head coach in Carolina, told him he wanted to run the ball more, and he basically refused to do it. So there's an issue there, right? The guy who hired you and brought you in doesn't want, you're not giving him what he wants. That's an issue. You can also blame that on Matt Rule, because he should have known what he was getting when he hired Brady, and he obviously didn't want what Brady had to offer. So,
and their run game stunk. So
their run game was bad, but they were quick to give up on it pretty often too. So, Brady's a guy who I think he could probably elevate Herbert's game. I think they could create a high-flying offense. I'm not entirely sure that he fits what Staley talked about when it came to marrying the run and the pass. And I think that's the biggest detractor right now with Brady for me, is he seems a little bit inflexible, and I'm not sure that he meets that criteria of marrying the run with the pass and being explosive in the run game. So while I wouldn't hate the hire, I would support it, I think, because I think it would help Herbert. I'm not sure it fits what Staley's looking for. So he fell down my list quite a bit, just based on what I read about him.
Okay. All right. I think we're going to differ on that, but let's move on. We got 3 more here. So now we're talking about guys that have been mentioned as possible offensive coordinators, but also guys that we would like to kind of throw in the ring as well as we go down this list. So let's talk about a name that's been linked to the Chargers. We've heard it before in conversations. They haven't reached out for an interview yet, but that's because they just got eliminated today. He works for the 49ers. It is Bobby Slowick, the San Francisco 49ers passing game coordinator.
So Slowick is a guy who started out as a defensive assistant for Washington in 2011 through 2013. He's been with San Francisco ever since. Started with them as a defensive quality control coach. He's also been an offensive assistant, the passing game specialist, and the passing game coordinator. Not really sure what the distinction is there between those two roles. But I will say this. If you look, especially at this year, with everything the 49ers have gone through with their passing game and their quarterbacks, they seem like they can drop anybody into their offense at the quarterback position, except for maybe Josh Johnson, and have success. I mean, and they don't change a whole lot, but I mean, what they wanted to do with Trey Lance in terms of running more of an RPO type of an offense, to what they did with Jimmy G, to what they did with Brock Purdy, those are some pretty different concepts. And they're creative in the way they get the ball to their wide receivers, and their tight ends for that matter. Their skill players make plays at all 3 levels of the defense. You've got Ayuk stretching the field. You've got Debo running the ball, catching screens, bubble screens, all kinds of plays underneath. Obviously, Kittle owns the middle of the field and can make plays deep on those deep overs. There are a lot of concepts there in that passing game that I think speak to the Chargers in terms of what they want to do and how they want to simplify things. And for that reason, Slowick appeals to me, even though it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what he did for the 49ers or how much of an impact he had on their scheme. He's been around Mike Shanahan. He's been around his son. And I think for those reasons, he's been kind of immersed in that system, and he could be an interesting hire, whether it's as a quarterback coach, an offensive coordinator, whatever the case might be. There could be a spot for him on this coaching staff, just because of the amount of time he spent around that system, around the Shanahans. And that's obviously something that appeals to Brandon Staley.
Yeah. I like this guy a lot. He started out as a video assistant. He didn't even start as a coach. He was the guy burning the tapes early on. He spent 10 years in the NFL, and I don't want to gloss over it, but he was a defensive assistant with Washington and then move over to offense. So he's got a little bit of both camps. He's been able to coach in both sides of the ball, which is really good. He took over for Mike LaFleur in 2017 as the passing game specialist, and then, of course, the passing game coordinator. And he's been with San Francisco for 3 years in that role. But, it was important for Staley to get an OC in the mold of that McVay-Shanahan system. And there's really no one closer right now in San Francisco than Slowick, who's been that passing game specialist with multiple QBs, like Jamie mentioned. Jimmy G, Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, that's 3 different QB styles, and they can get success out of all 3 of them. It is very intriguing. The way in which this offense is dynamic. You want to be like the 49ers. They are the best in the league right now in terms of offensive standard. And while Shanahan is the biggest reason for the Niners' success, Slowick knows how the sausage is made. He's been there for 3 years. He's been with Shanahan. He's been in his hip pocket and working with him on passing concepts as a passing game specialist and as a passing game coordinator. He's obviously in those meetings, and he's a part of that play calling. While he's not in the microphone and got a headset and calling the plays, he's obviously right there with him. So I'm very excited for the potential Slowick. The fact that he's worked on both sides. This is a guy who, if he doesn't get this OC job this time around, a guy that you got to think with how good this 49ers offense has been, you think that maybe some of that might rub off on Slowick a little bit. That's Shanahan magic. So I like Slowick, and a guy that now that the 49ers are out, might be getting a call very, very soon.
Yeah.
So next up is a name that we might want to throw in the hat here, and it is the Georgia offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, who got some play early on, but I feel like his name isn't being mentioned as much, especially not after today with Kellen Moore, who everybody seems to be obsessed with. But let's talk about Monken, because he's been an OC in the NFL before. He's been an OC with the Buccaneers and the Browns. He's also been a wide receiver coach for the Jags. In college, he's been an offensive coordinator for Eastern Michigan, Oklahoma State, currently now with Georgia. Also been the head coach for Southern Miss for 3 years, so has some head coaching experience. In 2015, his last year as head coach, he finished first in the division, took them to a bowl game before moving to the NFL. So he's now currently coming off back-to-back national championships with Georgia, and his QB Stetson Bennett became a Heisman finalist, which is a impressive feat within itself. He should probably be getting jobs just based off that alone. Georgia has improved every season under Monken, finishing as one of the most dynamic offenses in college football in 2022. In terms of development, Monken served as a passing game coordinator, wide receivers coach at LSU from 05 and 06. He helped develop first-round wide receiver selections, Dwayne Bowe and Gulp Buster Davis.
You didn't have to mention him.
Sorry. I'll edit that in post. I mean, just Dwayne Bowe, as coordinator at Oklahoma State. He got Brandon Whedon and Justin Blackman, both drafted in the first round in 2012. In his time in Jacksonville, Monken coached Reggie Williams, who set a club record with 10 touchdowns in 2007. As an OC with the Bucs, Mike Evans earned his first 2 Pro Bowls and topped 1,000 yards receiving in all 3 seasons under Monken. In 2018, he helped lead the Bucs to the NFL. They led the NFL in passing offense, finished third in the league in total offense. Quite honestly, when you look back on this, he fell into some really bad situations with the Bucs. Monken got hired with Dirk Cutter. Cutter was fired the following season. Monken got out then to Bruce Arians brought in his own staff the following year. The Browns, He gets hired with Freddie Kitchens in 2019. Kitchens gets fired the next season. Stefanski brings in a whole new staff, so Monken gets cut again. So it's not quite that he's better performing, but he just got tied with some bad head coaching. So Monken, to me, is an OC with real experience developing players at every level, in the college level, NFL level. He's got head coaching experience. He's got offensive coordinator experience from college and NFL. And quite honestly, a guy I would absolutely love to have Herbert tied to for the next couple of years. He is absolutely awesome. And I love Monken. I don't know that he'll leave Georgia, but a guy that I think should absolutely get an interview.
So he is starting to be mentioned for other jobs around the league, and he is starting to take interviews apparently.
Oh,
So,
awesome. I didn't see that.
It seemed like he was kind of off the table for most of the week while we were doing our work, last couple of weeks while we were doing our work. But he has been tied to several jobs, and I think I read that he's at least starting to take calls and take interviews over the last few days.
Awesome.
So it seems like he's at least considering a move back to the NFL. I love Todd Monken. I love everything about him. I mean, you went through his history. This is a guy who turned Brandon Weeden, Jamarcus Russell, Nick Mullins, and Stetson Bennett into likely NFL quarterbacks. You look at where he's been in terms of their offensive ranks in the country when he was at Oklahoma State. He has 2 years at Oklahoma State. They finished 3rd and 4th, respectively, in yards per play, 2nd and 4th in scoring, 8th and 30th out of 130 teams in third down conversions, 12th both years in red zone touchdown percentage. At Southern Miss, he took over. He had Nick Mullins as his quarterback for 3 years. The turnaround wasn't quite as stark as I thought it would be, but by his 3rd season there as the head coach at Southern Miss, they were 8th in the country in yards per play, 11th in scoring, 19th in third down, 87th in touchdown percentage. Not great, but they started 112th. Everywhere he goes, the offense gets better. And it's not like a Greg Olsen thing where they get better for a year and then they go back to sucking. They get better and they stay better. Tampa Bay, same thing. Yards per play, they went from 23rd to 9th to 2nd in his 3 years. Scoring 18th, 18th, 11th. Third downs, 6th, 4th, 2nd. Red zone, 20th, 24th, and 15th. And Georgia, they were 33rd in yards per play when he took over in 2020. That obviously was the COVID year. They started 3 different quarterbacks and basically ran 3 different schemes, a different scheme for each quarterback. They went from 33rd his first year in yards per play to 4th to 2nd. Scoring, they went from 34th to 8th to 4th. Third downs, 23rd, 22nd, 3rd. Red zones, 95th, 27th, 1st. They were 3rd and 6th, respectively, the last 2 years in yards per pass and yards per rush. All this guy does is churn out successful offenses. He does it over and over and over again. And I took some time to watch some film on his offense at Georgia, and holy shit, I'm in love. Everything they do is just brilliant. It's simple. Their running game is simple. They get a hat on a hat. They get a double team up front. They let the running back pick the gap, and they gash people on the ground. Their passing game is beautiful. The way they move their tight ends around, they get the tight ends the ball in space. Their best offensive weapons this year in particular were their tight ends. And all 3 of those guys had great years this year. The way that he moves offense, there isn't a whole lot of pre-snap motion in his offense. They'll send some guys in orbit motion and jet motion to try to figure out what the coverage scheme is. But there is a lot of post-snap motion with guards, tackles, and tight ends in the running game and in the passing game. Almost every run they call has 2 lead blockers coming from the opposite side of the field, getting out in space and killing people. If you play tight end for Todd Monken, you don't just have to block. You murder people. Their tight ends absolutely put guys in the ground. I mean, they spear people. They launch themselves at people. They bury people. It is absolutely beautiful. Everything about the way they run their offense makes sense for the Chargers. It is a pro-style scheme. It's not overly tricked out. It's very straight ahead. This is what we're going to do. We dare you to stop us. And if you listen to him talk about his offensive philosophy, it's a thing of beauty, and it lines up absolutely perfectly with what Brandon Staley said he wanted for this offense a couple weeks ago when they were talking about offensive coordinators. I saw a quote where Monken was asked something about his offensive philosophy, and he said, "No, I'm not paid to win. I am paid to score points.
Mm-hmm.
I am paid to be explosive on the ground and explosive in the run and score points and bury people. And that's what I want to do." And he'll admit he likes to throw the ball,
Mm-hmm.
but he is committed to the run. And they have success running inside and outside. And they spread the ball around. Everybody touches the ball. Everybody's involved. There is nobody who is not involved in that offense from a skill player standpoint. And I'm sorry, if you can get Nick Mullins in the NFL and you can take Stetson Bennett and turn him into a Heisman candidate 2 years in a row,
Mm-hmm.
imagine what he can do with Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the dream. We haven't done our top 5 yet, but this
Mm-hmm.
is the dream. There's another dream here coming up in a second, but this is the dream. And I can't say enough good things about Todd Monken. If they're serious about fixing the offense and they're serious about marrying the run and the pass and being explosive in the run and in the pass, this is the guy.
All right. So let's talk about our other dream scenario here. He hasn't got a call yet because their team is headed to the Super Bowl. It's our last one here. It is Brian Johnson, the Eagles quarterback coach.
Johnson is another dream. Johnson is so much fun. So Johnson played quarterback at Utah, graduated as the winningest quarterback in school history. He started out his coaching career as the Utah quarterbacks coach in 2010 and 2011. He was the quarterbacks coach and OC from 2012 to 2013. He was the quarterbacks coach at Mississippi State under Dan Mullins in 2014 and 2016, which coincided with Dak Prescott's time at Mississippi State. He was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Houston in 2017. He was the quarterbacks coach for Miami in 2018 and 2019, and he was promoted to OC for Florida in 2020 when Kyle Trask had his big year and put him on the map as an NFL quarterback. And he spent the last 2 years as the Eagles quarterback coach. So in terms of what Johnson has done from a developmental standpoint, he worked with Dak Prescott, Nick Fitzgerald, Felipe Franks, and Kyle Trask. 3 of those guys had time in the NFL. Obviously, Dak has become one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league and is often in the consideration among the top 5 or 10 quarterbacks in the league. Fitzgerald was with Tampa for a little while before eventually washing out, and Trask was a second-round pick and is still with the Bucs and probably will be their long-term quarterback here, or at least get a shot to be their long-term quarterback as soon as this coming year. I think the most impressive thing that they did, or that Johnson did, was he was really one of the guys responsible for developing Dak Prescott when he was at Mississippi State. Dak, when he first got to college, was really a running back playing quarterback. He wasn't terribly accurate. He wasn't terribly efficient. They were running a very gimmicky college spread, read option type of offense. But by his second season, Dak had 4,500 total yards and led the SEC in total offense in 2014. Then he set a school record for passing yards. He broke his own school record for passing yards in 2015. Fitzgerald had 3,800 yards in 2016 and led the SEC in total offense. And then I think, he went from 2 completely different style quarterbacks at Florida. He worked with Felipe Franks, who was kind of limited, but was very efficient and had a 143 efficiency rating for Florida in 2018. Franks got hurt in 2019. Trask started 10 games, completed 67% of his passes, 2,900 yards, 25 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And then 2020, he just blew up, 4,300 yards, 69% completions, 43 touchdowns, only 8 picks. And then if you look at offensive rankings for when Johnson was calling plays at the University of Houston, they were 57th in scoring, 15th in third down conversions, 31st in the country in TD percentage, red zone TD percentage and 35th in yards per game and yards per play. At Florida, when he was calling plays, they were in the top 20 in the country in scoring, third downs, red zone touchdown percentage, yards per game, and yards per play. And they were in the top 10 in third downs, yards per game, and yards per play. He made Kyle Trask, who, I mean, he can't hold Justin Herbert's jock in terms of physical talent.
Mm-hmm.
He made Trask look like a world beater at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
There were some arm strength concerns there with Trask, but what they really do is they spread the defense out. They teach their quarterbacks to anticipate throws. They don't necessarily throw to open receivers. They throw to open space on the field. When Trask was the quarterback in 2010, Trask had, like I said, 4,300 yards passing. They also had Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts both caught 70-plus passes for over 900 yards and 10 or more touchdowns in 2020. So they spread the ball around. They turned both those guys into first-round picks. They don't run the ball much, which I think is the one big knock on what Johnson does. He's seen a more effective running game with Philadelphia over the last 2 years. I think he deserves a lot of credit for the work that he's done at the NFL level with Jalen Hurts, a guy who I was not very high on coming out of college. I did not think he was going to be accurate enough or efficient enough to hold down a job in the NFL. And they have worked wonders with him, put him in a great position to succeed, and they create big windows for him to throw into. And he has been arguably the best quarterback in the league this year. So he has done some amazing work. I think if you're looking for pros on Johnson, prolific offenses at Florida and Houston with fairly limited quarterback play, puts his playmakers in a position to make plays in space, played a key role in developing Prescott and Trask, implements the RPO and option in the run game, which I think is something that could really help unlock Justin Herbert, because I think I'd like to see him. I don't want to see him run as much as Josh Allen or even as much as Jalen Hurts, but I do think seeing Justin run more, particularly on third down, to move the chains, not just to scramble around and make plays with his arm, I think is something that could help open up this offense quite a bit.
Yep.
He adjusts his scheme to fit his quarterback skill set. I mean, there couldn't be much more of a difference at the collegiate level between Dak Prescott and Kyle Trask, and even Felipe Franks there in the middle ground. His quarterbacks always improve year over year. He's learned under some really bright minds in terms of from Dan Mullen and Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen. And he's one of those fast rising offensive minds who I think is going to be on a fast track to being an OC and a head coach in the NFL here before too long. I think the cons are he's really dependent on running the ball with the quarterback. They don't really commit to running the ball too much with the running backs. He has fairly limited experience calling plays. He was only an OC for 2 years in college, which again, not a death knell, not something that eliminates him as an option, but just something to consider. And I think, the questions are, will he commit to a more traditional running plays in the NFL? And does he have the network to help find himself a quality quarterback coach? But Johnson is a guy who is on the rise. He's very exciting. He knows how to put his guys in a position to succeed, and he develops quarterbacks. And for that reason, he's very high on my list.
Yeah, me too. I love Brian Johnson. Yeah, like you mentioned, he played quarterback at Utah. He was actually the backup quarterback to Alex Smith while he was there. But yeah, quite honestly, every quarterback he's touched has gotten better every single year. As an OC, he had success at Florida. They were one of the more prolific passing offenses that year. He went to the NFL. He was a QB coach for the Eagles the last 2 years, and he helped develop Hurts his rookie year. And Jamie might not have been high on him. Not like I was very high on him. Nobody saw the MVP candidate he is today. And that has so much to do with Brian Johnson and his coaching as the Eagles quarterback coach. He is definitely a fast riser. I mean, the Eagles have the third best offense in the NFL, all behind Jalen Hurts. He's a quick riser. He's got experience and success as an offensive coordinator at college level. He has been part of a dynamic offense in Jalen Hurts. I absolutely love the fit of having Brian Johnson and a mobile quarterback like Justin Herbert to have some design runs to get him moving outside the pocket. When Justin Herbert is on the move, good things happen. And this year, whether it was because of the injury or that extra injury we found out about today, whatever it may be, he did not run much at all this season, and it kind of cost him a couple times. He slid early before first downs, didn't really give up his body as much as he did the year before. But when you've got a guy like Brian Johnson, who has done it with success at multiple levels with multiple different quarterbacks, I mean, the thing that he did with Dak Prescott, I mean, he was the architect for Dak Prescott's success. He was a running back. He didn't even eclipse 2,000 yards his first year there. Once Johnson got there, he was over 3,500 yards passing. His last year there at Mississippi State, he had 24 touchdowns over those 2 seasons. I mean, he was absolutely incredible as not only a passer, but also as a runner. I love this marriage here between Brian Johnson and Justin Herbert. He's got the experience, the creativity that's going to be needed. And while he doesn't have the NFL mileage that a lot of these other guys do, he's been part of a successful offense in the NFL and in college, an offense that is catered to a movement of the quarterback, and hopefully the Chargers' new OC can do the same with Herbert's athleticism, much like Brian Johnson did with Dak and Kyle Trask and Jalen Hurts. So this guy is absolute home run. He has not got a call. Obviously, he's still coaching. Maybe with the extra week off, he might get a call here. But Brian Johnson is very, very high on my list. So we've been teasing it all show long. So we covered 10 guys. Can you do all 10 in order, Jamie, or do you just have a top 5?
I only did a top 5, but I can, if you want to start, I can do my top 5 or my top 10 after you go.
Okay. All right. So let's go.
I know who number 10 is.
Yeah. 10's easy. So we can go 10. We can go 10-1. Number 10, and I think 10 and 9 are probably going to be the same for both of us. So Greg Olsen, number 10 for me. Do not want him. Keep away. Definitely not an offensive coordinator. Number 9 for me is Jared Johnson. There just is not enough stuff to really put in there. And even with all of Greg Olsen's experience, I would take a Jared Johnson over him any day. After that, I've got Zach Robinson at number 8. Number 7 is Kellen Moore, which is going to disappoint a lot of people here in this chat here. Number 6 is Luke Steckel. Number 5 is Bobby Slowick. Number 4 is Thomas Brown. Number 3 is Joe Brady. Number 2 is Todd Monken. And number 1, my favorite OC in this cycle, is Brian Johnson.
So we agree on number 10. I'd put him at 11 if I could. Greg Olsen.
Number 9 too? Jared Johnson?
Number 9 we also agree at.
Okay.
Yep. So my number 9 is Gerard Johnson. My number 8 is, I think it's Bobby Slowick.
Okay.
My number 7 is going to be, let me see here.
You're doing it on the spot, huh?
I'm doing 7 through 10 on the spot.
Okay.
My number 7 is going to be Thomas Brown. My number 6 is Joe Brady. My number 5 is Luke Steckel. My number 4 is Kellen Moore.
Wow.
My number 3 is Zach Robinson. 2 is Brian Johnson. And 1 is Todd Monken.
Okay, so we flip-flop on 1 and 2. But we got those as the top 2.
Yep.
All right. Okay, some we're higher on, some we're not, but we agree on the bottom 2, that's for sure. Okay, all right. I think we're good here. We appreciate you guys. Almost an hour and a half of offensive coordinator talk. We will be back here to talk about the offensive coordinator when they hire them. And if there's any other news, we will hear about that too. And we appreciate everybody for following along with us. We'll let you know about the feed business and all that other stuff, but the podcast will keep rolling on. So I appreciate you guys listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.